The seed that beats beef. Why this 5,000-year-old ghost crop is every survivalist's best-kept secret. Imagine a seed so powerful it carries more protein than a ribeye steak. Yet it thrives in heat so intense it turns a healthy cornfield into nothing but dust. For over 5,000 years, this single plant was the beating heart of civilizations surviving in the most unforgiving, sun-scorched deserts on our planet. It grew with almost no water, healed the very soil it touched, and stood as a fortress of nutrition against famine and drought. But then, in less than one human lifetime, we intentionally erased it. We replaced this ancient survivor with weaker, thirstier crops, buried its name, and let it vanish from our fields as if it never existed. But here is the miracle. Beneath the parched soil, the seed didn't die. It slept, waiting for a generation that would need it once again. Before we dive into the incredible story of this lost survival seed and how you can grow it in your own backyard with almost zero effort, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And what is the number one crop you are determined to grow for your family's food security? By the time we finish today, you are going to understand exactly why this bean is being called America's survival crop. And I'll show you the simple, lazy gardening method used by ancient desert farmers to get a full harvest in just 60 days with only 2 rains. Stick around until the end, because I'm going to reveal a shocking secret about why this plant was actually banned by colonial powers, and it wasn't because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. We live in a world where our food system feels more fragile than ever. Between skyrocketing prices at the grocery store and weather patterns that seem to flip-flop between record droughts and flash floods, the modern way of farming is struggling to keep up. We have become dependent on crops like corn and soy that require massive amounts of water, chemical fertilizers, and constant pampering just to survive. If the water stops flowing or the temperature climbs just a few degrees too high, those crops fail, and our plates go empty. This is why looking back at the wisdom of our ancestors isn't just a hobby for history buffs anymore. It is a vital strategy for anyone who wants to ensure their family stays fed no matter what happens to the global supply chain. Think about the stories our grandparents told us about surviving through lean times. They didn't rely on high-tech irrigation or laboratory-engineered seeds. They relied on plants that were tough, plants that knew how to remember, how to live when everything else forgot. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the tepary bean, a crop that literally produces its own armor against the heat and can store on a shelf for years without losing its nutritional punch. This isn't just a plant. It's preventative medicine that grows freely in the sand, once keeping entire communities free from the metabolic diseases that plague us today. We are about to open a vault of knowledge that was nearly lost to history, starting with a 2,500-year-old discovery in a Mexican archaeological site that changed everything we thought we knew about survival gardening. To understand the power of this seed, we have to travel back to the Tehuacan Valley in Mexico. Archaeologists digging in ancient storage pits there made a discovery that seems like something out of a science fiction movie. They found seeds perfectly preserved for over 2,500 years. But the history goes even deeper than that. Genetic analysis has revealed that this seed, the tepary bean, was domesticated 5,000 years ago in a single, brilliant event in the Sonoran Desert. The people who cultivated it didn't have a written language as we know it today, but they possessed a botanical wisdom that modern science is only just beginning to catch up with. They were master survivalists who lived in a land where a single mistake in planting could mean the end of a tribe, and yet, they chose this bean before any grain. They didn't choose it for the flavor alone, though it is delicious. They chose it because the tepary bean is a biological fortress. Known scientifically as Phaseolus acutifolius, it was literally engineered by evolution to thrive where almost nothing else can grow. It features a genome that is essentially a survival kit. For those of us who deal with brutal summer heat waves that wither our tomatoes and scorch our lettuce, the tepary bean has a secret weapon. It produces special amino sugars that prevent its proteins from breaking down even when the air temperature hits a staggering 118 degrees Fahrenheit. When the sun is at its most punishing, the plant doesn't just die. It folds its leaves up during the day to save every drop of moisture, only opening them again under the cool of the night sky. What makes this truly incredible for the lazy gardener or the senior gardener who wants maximum results for minimum effort, is the sheer efficiency of this plant. The tepary bean doesn't just survive the heat. It heals the earth it lives in. It fixes nitrogen from the air, meaning it actually leaves the soil richer after you harvest it than it was when you started. And when it comes to nutrition, it puts modern supermarket food to shame. It contains more protein per ounce than beef, up to 25 grams of protein for every 100 grams of beans. For the Tejano Awadam people, who call it tapiari, the bean was so central to their existence that they believed the Milky Way wasn't made of stars, but of white tepary beans scattered across the night sky. If you are looking for a crop that fits a plant once harvest forever mindset, this is as close as you can get to a self-sufficient miracle. About 1,000 years ago, the Hohokam people cultivated these throughout Arizona using a method that completely defies modern agricultural logic. They would plant them in arroyos, which are dry washes that only flood briefly during the monsoon rains. These beans are so fast that they can germinate with a single rain and reach full maturity in just 60 days. Think about that. In a region where rainfall might be as low as 3 inches a year, the tepary bean still produces a harvest. Stick with me, because in a moment we're going to cover how this incredible plant went from being a staple that sustained millions of pounds of food to a lost relic, and how you can use it to protect your own metabolic health. By the early 1920s, the Tejano Awadam farmers were successfully growing 1.5 million pounds of tepary beans per year. It was a massive network of trade and survival that linked Arizona, Sonora, and the Great Plains. But this bean wasn't just a commodity. It was the foundation of a health profile we can only dream of today. Before processed foods arrived in these regions, the Tejano Awadam people had virtually no incidence of type 2 diabetes. Their traditional diet, centered around the tepary bean, naturally maintained healthy cholesterol and balanced blood sugar. The bean's secret lies in its high-soluble fiber, which slows digestion, and its low glycemic index, making it a perfect food for metabolic health. If you're gardening with your future health in mind, this is where it gets truly fascinating. Modern research has confirmed that tepary beans contain protease inhibitors that can actually inhibit the growth of certain cancer cells. This was never just a side dish. It was preventative medicine growing freely in the desert sand. It's a tragedy of history that a crop this powerful, which sustained communities through drought, famine, and impossible heat, was nearly wiped out not by nature, but by human ideology. It makes you wonder, if you want your garden to feed your grandchildren and keep them healthy, shouldn't we be looking at the plants that have already proven they can do exactly that for 5 millennia? So, how does a super seed like this vanish? The first blow came in the 1600s with the arrival of Spanish missions. The goal was to consolidate power and extract resources, and that meant forcing native farmers to plant European crops like wheat and barley for church tithes. The tepary bean was seen as a threat to this colonial order because it was too wild to control. Think about the power in that statement. A plant that grows without irrigation, without ownership, and without dependence on external inputs is a plant that gives people independence. Because it didn't fit the system, fields of tepary beans were often replaced or even burned. The irony is heartbreaking. While the European crops frequently failed during long droughts, the tepary beans could have kept those people alive. But like the hardy mesquite tree, this bean does not surrender easily. The seeds stayed buried in the soil, sleeping through centuries, waiting for their turn to rise again. By the 1930s, a second wave of erasure began, not through religion this time, but through the rise of industrial mechanization. If this story is hitting home for you and you're starting to see why we need to protect these rebel seeds, tap that like button so more people can discover this forgotten wisdom. Coming up next, I'll explain why the very thing that makes this plant a survival masterpiece also made it a nightmare for modern machines. The 1920s was a golden age for the tepary bean, but World War II changed the landscape of American farming forever. As farmers left their land to work for wages on large-scale cotton farms driven by well irrigation, the traditional ways began to slip away. This new era was built on machines, mechanical harvesters and tractors designed for industrial monoculture. Unfortunately, the tepary bean is a nightmare for a machine. Because it is a survivor, its pods mature at different times and must be picked by hand. In the wild, this is a brilliant strategy. If a predator or a storm hits today, there are still more pods coming tomorrow. But for a system built on speed and uniformity, this staggered harvest was a deal breaker. If you wait too long for all the pods to ripen, the early ones shatter, spilling their precious seeds onto the ground. Government subsidies started flowing toward corn, soy, and cotton, crops that fed livestock and industry, not necessarily the people living on the land. By the 1950s, a crop that had sustained 5,000 years of human civilization was nearly extinct, disappearing in just 2 decades. It was only thanks to a handful of families who refused to forget that the seed survived at all. People like Ramona Button found black tepary beans tucked away in old trunks and clay jars, passing them down like family heirlooms. The world finally started paying attention again in the 1970s when global droughts hit hard. While modern soybeans saw yields drop and corn struggled to pollinate in the relentless heat, agricultural researchers in the American Southwest were stunned to find a vine with white blossoms growing strong at 115 degrees Fahrenheit. It was, of course, the tepary bean, alive and well after 4 centuries of attempted erasure. When they tested it in plots with almost no irrigation, it still produced a full crop. Even more impressive, scientists found that nitrogen levels in the soil were higher after the harvest than before planting. The plant literally healed the dirt it grew in. A USDA researcher, Dr. Howard Scott, famously called it a gift from the past to the future. When compared directly to soybeans, the tepary offered 20 to 25% protein, resisted pests naturally, and required only 1/3 of the water. So, why isn't this bean in every grocery store today? The answer is a hard pill to swallow. You can't patent it, you can't easily modify it, and because it doesn't need expensive fertilizers, it isn't profitable for big agriculture. Profit beat survival for a long time, but for the home gardener, that lack of profitability is actually your greatest advantage. It means this plant belongs to you, not a corporation. Stick with me, because in the next part, we'll talk about the indigenous-led revival that is bringing this bean back to our tables. The real revival began in 1996 when a community group called Tohono O'odham Community Action, or TACA, started a mission to recover ancient seed lines from the storage jars of elders. Some of these varieties hadn't been seen in a field for over 300 years. Farmers like Terrell Dew Johnson and Sterling Johnson began the painstaking work of planting the ancestors, working by hand without chemicals or heavy machinery to bring these seeds back to life. By the early 2000s, they weren't just growing seeds, they were restoring an identity. They proved that the tepary bean could grow with 75% less water than modern commercial beans. Today, the world is finally waking up to the fact that we need this ghost crop for our collective survival. Climate models warn that global crop yields could drop significantly by 2050 due to rising heat. Yet the tepary bean has already spent 5,000 years thriving in those exact conditions. It stays green and sets its pods even when the thermometer hits 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of this, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture is now testing crossbreeds of the tepary with common beans to try and teach our modern food systems how to resist heat and drought. But for the home gardener, you don't need a lab. You just need the seed and the willingness to let the plant do what it was born to do. If you forget everything else we talked about today, remember this. The tepary bean is not just a relic of the past. It is a blueprint for the future of food security. It is a crop that asks for almost nothing and gives back protein that rivals meat, all while healing the soil beneath your feet. It survived centuries of colonial erasure and industrial neglect simply because it remembers how to live when everything else forgets. The secret to its power is that it cannot be owned or controlled. It belongs to the desert and to the people who are wise enough to plant it. If you want to take your first step toward true self-sufficiency today, I encourage you to seek out heirloom tepary seeds from indigenous-led farms. Start small. Plant a patch in that dry, sun-baked corner of your yard where nothing else seems to survive, and watch as 5,000 years of resilience springs from the sand. Tell me in the comments, which variety of this survival crop are you going to plant first, and what country are you watching from? If you found this dive into lost gardening wisdom helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Next, I'm considering a video on 10 medicinal weeds hiding in your lawn that can act as a natural pharmacy. Comment medicinal if you want me to open that vault next. Would you like me to help you draft a specific planting guide or a list of reputable sources where you can find these heirloom tepary seeds?